Local elections with the highest increase was the non-sectarian Alliance Party. Would the Secretary of State share with me the joy at seeing their tremendous non-sectarian result?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that the message I took from the local elections is that what people on the doorstep want is they want to see restored, devolved government as soon as possible, and that's what I'm working to deliver.
Simon Orr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my hope that having got the local elections under our belts and just on the cusp of the European elections, with both of those out of the way, a really firm positive focus can be placed by all parties on restoring devolved assembly back in Stormont?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend that I know that the parties in Northern Ireland are determined that they will do all they can to deliver restored, devolved government, and that is what is best for the people of Northern Ireland. It's what the people of Northern Ireland want. But this will not be easy. There are challenges, and I would ask that we all offer our support to the parties in Northern Ireland to help them take those difficult decisions.
One sentence. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Go on. Get on with it. No chance. Would the Secretary of State comment, or like to comment on the assessment of the election of Councillor Gary Donnelly, former spokesperson for 32 County Sovereignty Movement in the electoral area where the murder of innocent bystander Liam McKee took place, and who unapologetically and indiscriminately towards police and bystanders. What progress has been made in that murder investigation and the process as well?
The honourable gentleman's a fan of the dash and the semicolon. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, very good at the use of a sentence. I would just repeat that the lesson I took from the local elections was that people want restored, devolved government as soon as possible.
Chris Davis.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as the House heard earlier on, we had over 17,000 responses to the consultation, many of them containing tales of personal tragedy and loss. So I hope everyone will understand the need to consider them all respectfully and carefully. The process is almost finished, and I hope we will be able to publish an analysis of the views they contain.
Order. This is very unfair on the Minister who's answering a question about the legacy of Northern Ireland's past. This is a matter of the utmost seriousness and solemnity, and I think that the Minister and the questioner should be accorded respect. The Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just finishing my remarks by saying the process of considering those tragic submissions is almost finished. I hope we will be able to publish an analysis of the views they contain very soon.
Chris Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that we must listen carefully to this consultation? And does he agree with the words of the Secretary of State in the foreword to the consultation, where she stated amnesties are not the right approach and believe that justice should be pursued?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do. I mean, any solution must allow both Unionists and Republicans to achieve closure, and for all of Northern Ireland to draw a line and move on. Otherwise, it will not last. We've been working closely with the political parties in Northern Ireland, as well as colleagues across both houses, on the way forward. And last week, the Secretary of State met the Victims Commissioner and legacy groups as well.
Tony Lloyd.
Mr. Speaker, a part of the dark past of Northern Ireland is also the question of historical institutional abuse. The Secretary of State has said that she now intends to act. The victims groups this week called on her to stand down and resign. She needs to regain their confidence. She needs to give a very clear timetable as to when she will take action in this House and elsewhere. Will the Minister now make it clear when that will happen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thought I heard just now the Secretary of State doing a pretty good job of showing the personal commitment and also the urgency with which she is treating this. I'm afraid I can't add any more detail to the timetable, but I hope everybody here will have understood and heard the passion in her voice and the determination to move this forward promptly and swiftly.
Bob Stewart.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable and gallant friend gave a very powerful speech on this on Monday, and I would encourage anybody here who hasn't heard it to go back and listen again. I think we both agree, he and I, that the current situation isn't working for anyone. The question isn't whether things need to change, because they clearly do, but how. So we have laws which work for police veterans as well as armed forces, for unionists and for nationalists, for victims and their families on all sides of the community, and which bring truth and justice and closure. so society can move on. We will bring forward proposals as soon as possible.
Rob Stewart.
As an ex-soldier, now a Member of Parliament, I'm ashamed. Ashamed that my government hasn't sorted this matter out. I ask the Minister, and especially the Secretary of State, who's been in post longer, how much longer before it can be sorted out, and are you not ashamed?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable and gallant friend, having served himself in Northern Ireland, speaks with huge authority in this area, and I suspect this is something which successive governments need to share some blame for failing to fix over many years, and it is clearly, as I said in my initial answer, a situation which cannot be allowed to continue. It is not right, it is not just, and it must be sorted out as promptly as it can. On that, I hope I'm sure that he and I both agree.
Mr. Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was with regret yesterday we got a revelation from government through written ministerial statement rather than an oral statement about their proposals for the way forward, and we should hang our head in shame that we intend to treat service personnel who served in Northern Ireland differently from those who served overseas. When I questioned the Attorney-General on this issue on the 31st of January, he said clearly that to treat service personnel differently would be plainly wrong. He was right, Minister, wasn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the important thing here is that for the servicemen and women who served under Operation Banner, as we've heard repeatedly in both the urgent question last week and the Westminster Hall debate on Monday, for those servicemen and women, it felt the same no matter what. Our challenge, though, is to say that if we're going to come up with an answer which will work when it gets inevitably taken to court by the lawfare-mongers, that we have to have something which works on the basis of the different legal starting points for things that happened in the UK as opposed to things that happened abroad, but which end up at an answer which feels the same to our servicemen and women and provides the same robust protections to them no matter what.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. John Woodcock.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today marks 2 years since the Manchester Arena attack. It was a cowardly and sickening attack that deliberately targeted innocent and defenceless children. Members from across the House will want to join me in sending my thoughts and prayers to the families and friends of all the victims. And I'm sure members will also want to join me in paying tribute to the immense bravery and courage that the emergency services showed that night. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will want to associate themselves with the words she has just spoken about the Manchester attack. Now, she may not have long left, and good luck with those meetings later today, but she can act now against the return of banned chemical weapons. British experts are this morning investigating a suspected chlorine attack by al-Assad in Idlib. If it is proved, will she lead the international response against the return of this indiscriminate evil?
Well,
Prime Minister.
The honourable gentleman is right to raise the issue of the evil of the use of chemical weapons. We, of course, acted in Syria with France and the United States when we saw chemical weapons being used in Syria. We, of course, suffered the use of chemical weapons here on the streets of the United Kingdom and took a robust response supported by our international friends and allies. And we condemn all use of chemical weapons. We're in close contact with the United States. We're monitoring the situation closely. And if any use of chemical weapons is confirmed, we'll respond appropriately. But our position is clear. We consider Assad incapable of delivering a lasting peace, and his regime lost its legitimacy due to its atrocities against its own Syrian people.
Antoinette Sandbat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that energy efficiency measures are critical in tackling climate change? Bringing every home up to an EPC C standard could save 25% of electricity generation. The equivalent of 6 Hinkley Point nuclear power stations. It could save every family £270, and it could potentially pay for itself by generating £1.27 for every pound invested in it.
Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend has made an excellent point, and we, like her, absolutely recognise the importance of this issue. So the government is committed to improving energy efficiency in 2.5 million homes by 2030. And our aim is to bring 2.5 million fuel-poor homes up to an Energy Performance Certificate C rating by 2030. And as my honourable friend has said, this will indeed help to save energy and also bring down bills.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in commemorating all the victims of the Manchester bombing 2 years ago. Our thoughts are with the friends and the family of all those that were killed, the survivors, and of course the emergency service workers who gave such heroic service that night. They live with the horrors of this for the rest of their lives, and 10:31 tonight will be a very poignant moment for many people in Manchester. Mr. Speaker, I also want to pay tribute to the last survivor of the Hull headscarf revolutionaries, Yvonne Blenkinsop. She's visiting Parliament today. She led a campaign for basic safety on the UK's fishing fleets in the 1960s, and as a result, many lives were saved. I think people like her have made such an enormous contribution to our national life, they should be recognised for it. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to express on behalf of the Labour Party my outrage that the government has again failed our steel industry, putting 5,000 jobs at risk in British Steel, 20,000 more in the supply chain. This government has failed those people, and even at this late stage, and there is a statement later on today, must step in to save those jobs. Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister, why are schools having to close early on Friday afternoon due to spending cuts?
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman, because he has raised the issue of British Steel, and obviously we recognise that this is a worrying time for the thousands of dedicated British steel workers and their families, but also those in the supply chain and local communities. We have indeed, the government has been working tirelessly with the company, with its owner, Greybull Capital, and lenders to explore all potential options to secure a solution for the company. We showed through the ETS agreement that we were willing to act, but we can only act within the law. And it is clear that it would be unlawful to provide a guarantee or loan on the terms requested by the company. We will be working with the company and others and the official receiver in the days and weeks ahead to ensure that we can pursue every step to secure the future of the operations at Scunthorpe, Skinning Grove and on Teesside. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has also agreed an indemnity for the official receiver to enable British Steel to continue to operate in the immediate future. There are no job losses at this time, and the official receiver has already said staff will continue to be paid and employed. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be updating the House in a statement later this afternoon. And on the issue of schools, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools.
Well, that would explain why 26 schools close early on a Friday every week, because they don't have enough money to keep themselves open. And, Mr. Speaker, there are more than 1,000 schools across England that are turning to crowdfunding websites with a wish list of things they want to raise money to buy. Really exotic things like pencils, like glue, like textbooks. Why are they forced to do this if they allegedly have enough money in the first place?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentlemen, as I've said here before, and I've just quoted, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools. We have also put in place to ensure a fairer distribution of the funding between our schools. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But what is important in our education system is not just about what government puts in, it's about what quality of education is received by the children. There are more children in good and outstanding schools, The disadvantage attainment gap has been narrowed, and record rates of disadvantaged young people are going to university. That's a record to be proud of.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the Prime Minister had a chance to listen to or read the words of the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. He said, and I quote, "The fact that so many schools are doing this should be ringing serious alarm bells for the government." The Prime Minister doesn't seem to be aware of the crisis that's facing so many in education at the present time. So can she be very clear with the House? Has per pupil funding risen or fallen since 2010?
Prime Minister.
Right, honourable gentlemen, we're giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But why are we able to do that? It's because the Conservatives have taken a balanced approach to our economy and managed our finances well. What would Labour give us? 1,000 billion extra pounds in borrowing. That would mean higher taxes, fewer jobs and less money to go into our schools.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Minister out in two ways, Mr. Speaker. One is a Labour government would properly fund our schools. It wouldn't shortchange our children. And we wouldn't use Orwellian words like fair funding while we're cutting. Per pupil funding, Mr. Speaker, just so the Prime Minister understands it, has fallen by 8%. For sixth forms, it's 24%. At the end of last year, the Prime Minister said, austerity is over. Maria, who describes herself as a teacher in an underfunded school, wrote to me this week. And she asked this. Maria is a teacher in an underfunded school. I think you need to listen to her. When will the government stop making false claims of increased funding for schools and start to tackle the serious problems faced by teachers? When will the cuts end for our children's schools?
Prime Minister.
I repeat what I said. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But let's just see the situation that this government inherited and that we would see under a Labour government in the future. Having to spend more on debt interest than on our schools budget. That's not because of what this government is doing, because we're bringing debt down. It's the legacy left by a Labour government. More money on debt than on our schools.
Jeremy Corbyn.
What this government has squandered is what it inherited. Children's centres, Sure Start, children taken out of poverty. It's squandered the future for so many of our children. And
Order! Mr. Burkhardt. You're an educated young man. When you came into the House, you struck me as a very well-behaved fellow. Calm yourself and listen. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education's funding chief met with school leaders recently, and he told them the first thing to say is obviously they are not generous budgets. He's very, very cautious with his words. They are budgets which leave schools with real pressures to face. Everyone agrees, Mr. Speaker, that our creative industries in this country are an enormous strength to our economy. So why then have the arts borne the brunt of the government's brutal cuts to school funding? So many children losing out on music and creative art in our schools because of decisions made by central government.
Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he started his question by claiming that this government had squandered what had been left by the last Labour government. Let's just look at what was left by the last Labour government. What? Oh, they don't want to be reminded what they left in the last time they were in government. What did the last Labour government leave? Unemployment higher than when it went into office. What did the last Labour government leave? The biggest deficit in our peacetime history. And what were we told by the departing Chief Secretary to the Treasury? Under Labour, there is no money left.
My question, Mr. Speaker, was actually about funding for arts and creative subjects in schools. A survey has shown that 9 out of 10 secondary schools have cut back on lesson time, staff or facilities in at least one of the creative arts subjects. Are the artists and actors of tomorrow only to come from the private schools, while she continues to cut the funding for state schools. When the Prime Minister says that school funding has been protected, she's denying, Mr. Speaker, the daily experience of teachers, parents and pupils. She's denying the incontrovertible evidence of the IFS, education bodies and teaching unions. She is actually in outright denial. And when the wealth of the richest 1,000 people has increased by £50 billion in the last year alone, don't tell us the money isn't there for our children's schools. This government has cut vital public services to give tax cuts to the privileged few. Can the Prime Minister name a more damaging policy, a more short-sighted policy than cutting investment in our future, our children?
Prime Minister! I say to the right honourable gentleman, the richest have paid more tax every year under the Conservatives. No, wait for it. They have paid more under every year under the Conservatives than in any year under a Labour government. And he talks about what happens in our schools. As I've said, we are putting record funding into our schools. But what matters is the quality of education that our children get. Labour oppose the phonics checks. They want to scrap academies and free schools. They'd abolish SATs. That doesn't help to raise the standards in our schools. But let's just look at the Labour record. When they were in government, standards were lower than they are today. Where they are in government in Wales, standards are lower than in England. And if they were to get into government, we would see more of the same. Lower standards, less opportunity for young people for a brighter future under Labour. It's the Conservative Party that give good quality of education, good jobs and a good future.
Mr. Ranald J. Wardener.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend explain why she ordered that the consultation on the Troubles in Northern Ireland should not contain proposals for a statute of limitations, as was reported in the Sunday Telegraph? And can she update us on what the government will actually get on and do?
Prime Minister!
First of all, he shouldn't necessarily believe all the reports he reads in the newspapers, but let me be very clear on this particular issue. Around 3,500 people were killed in the Troubles. The vast majority were murdered by terrorists. The legal position is clear. Any amnesty or statute of limitations would have to apply across the board. It would apply to terrorists. I am not prepared to accept a proposal which brings in amnesties for terrorists.
Ian Blackford.
I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister of the heinous crimes that took place 2 years ago in Manchester. We all must stand together against terrorism. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's customs tariff plan has been described by the UK's former representative to the EU as the definition of insanity. Her customs union compromise already dismissed by the European Union. Isn't this new deal just a fantasy?
Yeah. Prime Minister!
Says the right honourable gentleman, I've set out the 10 points about the New Deal. There is an issue about customs. There is a difference of opinion in this House on the future customs arrangement with the European Union. That's why it's important that this House actually comes to a decision on that issue. Allowing the second reading of the withdrawal agreement bill will enable this House to come to a decision on that issue. It will also enable the House to come to a decision on a second referendum, which I continue to believe would not be the right route for this country to go down. We should deliver on the first referendum before suggesting anything about a second.
Ian Blackford!
My goodness, talk about ignoring reality. Prime Minister, look at the benches behind you. The Prime Minister is fooling no one but herself. And the truth, Mr. Speaker, is that the people of Scotland don't want her deal. Her own party doesn't want her deal. And now even the pro-Brexit Labour front bench won't support her deal. Her time is up. Tomorrow, people in Scotland have a choice to send a message, to send pro-European, outward-looking Scottish National Party MEP MPs to Brussels to stop Brexit. Prime Minister, what party does she think the people of Scotland will choose?
Prime Minister! There is only one party in Scotland guaranteeing no more referendums, and that's the Conservative Party.
James Heapy!
Thank you, sir.
Colleagues, calm yourselves. Dignity, restraint. Let's hear Mr. Heapy.
Thank you, sir. My constituent, Jackie Luxon, was 26 weeks pregnant at the time of a car crash that caused her baby to be stillborn. However, only the injuries caused to Mrs. Luxon and their older daughter were relevant when charging and subsequently sentencing the driver whose dangerous driving caused the crash. The baby, Grace, got no justice at all. And I understand from the police and stillbirth support groups that the Luxon's tragic experience is sadly far from unique. Will the Prime Minister look again at the 1988 Road Traffic Act so that those who cause death to viable babies over 24 weeks gestation through dangerous driving can be held responsible for these tragic losses of life?
Prime Minister!
I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I know that all members from across the House, and it will have been obvious in the response to his question, will want to join me in sending deepest sympathies to my honourable friend's constituent. As my honourable friend will know, the courts can already and do consider harm caused to a mother or unborn child in sentencing for an offence, and I know my honourable friend has discussed changing the law on this particular issue with the Ministry of Justice. They are concerned that there could be far-reaching unintended consequences of doing so, but I have asked them to keep the law under review. I know that my honourable friend, along with others in this House, will be continuing to work on this issue. I'm sure everybody recognises the compassion that my honourable friend is showing in raising this issue. What we want to ensure is that what he is proposing is not something that could lead to other unintended consequences of the sort that he would not wish to see.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, it's been brought to my attention that some children suffering from severe epilepsy have been able to greatly reduce and in some cases end their seizures if they've got access to Bedrolite. Due to the cumbersome and discriminatory system this government implemented on the 1st of November 2018, parents are required to travel abroad, pay thousands of pounds and break the law to bring medicine back, or pay extraordinary prices to access Bedrolite privately in the UK. Rather than people having to fight for access on a case-by-case basis, will the Prime Minister apply some common sense and show a soupçon of compassion and do everything she can to make medical cannabis available to the many people that are suffering and ensure that those who can benefit do?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that these are, I fully understand that these cases are desperately difficult and my sympathies are with the families and friends. The government did change the law, as he said, and specialist doctors on the General Medical Council Specialist Register can now prescribe cannabis-based products for medicinal use where there is clinical evidence of benefit. NHS England and the Chief Medical Officer have made it clear that cannabis-based products can be prescribed for medicinal use in appropriate cases, but we must trust doctors to make clinical decisions in the best interests of patients.
Kevin Olin-Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When Sally Masterton discovered a £1 billion fraud at Lloyds, the bank sought to discredit her to the regulator, constructively dismissed her and prevented her working with the police investigation who had described her role as vital. 5 years later, the bank apologised and paid an undisclosed amount of compensation, yet the FCA continued to refuse to investigate. Would the Prime Minister use her powers to compel them to do so and sanction those responsible, including, if relevant, the Chief Executive for those 5 years, Antonio Horta Osorio?
I say to my honourable friend, I think obviously it's important to remember that the events at HBOS Reading branch constituted criminal activity, and it's right that those responsible were brought to justice. The FCA are currently conducting 2 investigations into the events at HBOS Reading, including the bank's communications with regulators following the discovery of the misconduct. And Lloyds have appointed a former High Court judge, Dame Linda Dobbs, to consider whether issues related to HBOS Reading were properly investigated and reported by Lloyds Banking Group. Those findings will be shared with the FCA, and I look forward to the conclusion of all those investigations.
Toby Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, Brampton Primary School in Chesterfield has an exemplary record in special needs education. Yet under the government's funding formula, the first £6,000 of every special needs child isn't actually funded by the government, when even the Tory lead member for education in Derbyshire describes a school like Brampton as a victim of their own success. Isn't it time that the Prime Minister, in her final days, changed the funding formula and started looking after those special needs children?
I say to the honourable gentleman, we have been putting more money into special educational needs. I recognise that for many parents, getting the support that is required for their children can be a difficult process with the local authorities. We recognise the importance of special needs, and that is precisely why we have been putting extra support in there.
Mr. Alston-Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I thank the Prime Minister for the amount of British aid which flows through to the World Food Programme in Yemen, and ask if she's noted in the last 48 hours a report by its excellent director David Beasley drawing attention to the diversion of aid and the theft of aid in Houthi-controlled areas by Houthi authorities. Would she urge the international community to increase the pressure on Houthi leadership to resolve this and further the efforts for peace in Yemen, rather than take the slightly easy course of always focusing on the Yemeni government and the Saudi-led coalition?
Well, my right honourable friend raises a very important point. We are all concerned about the humanitarian situation in the Yemen. As he rightly says, this government has a good record in terms of the amount of money that we are providing, the aid that we are providing to help those in the Yemen. But of course, it is only of benefit if it is able to reach those who need it. And it is incumbent on all parties to ensure that that aid reaches those who need it. We will continue to support the efforts to bring a lasting peace to the Yemen. A political settlement there is the way to get that sustainability and security for the future. But it's incumbent on everybody to make sure that the aid that is being provided for those who are desperately in need is able to reach those who need it most.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 5th of June, the eyes of the world will be on Portsmouth for D-Day 75. Event planned will give justice to the sacrifices made by veterans, like my own grandfather, and will show Portsmouth to be a place that fosters a legacy of remembrance, reflection, and reconciliation. Our allies in World War II, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US, have all taken the steps to ensure coroners record suicide amongst the veteran community. Prime Minister, why don't we?
Prime Minister.
Can I say, first of all, to the honourable gentleman that it is indeed right that the eyes of the world will be on Portsmouth for the D-Day National Commemorative event. This will be putting our veterans first. It remembers their sacrifices and their achievements, and we will highlight the historic strength of the Western Alliance and the transatlantic partnership. He's raised a specific issue in relation to the coroner's reports, and I will write to him in response to that. But can I say that I look forward, as do others, to being in Portsmouth to commemorate this very important anniversary.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, 43 years ago, I, like many others, was ordered to serve in Northern Ireland to keep the peace by terrorists attacking and killing civilians in Northern Ireland. Many of my colleagues and others did not come back, including one, Robert Nairac, a friend, who was tortured, murdered, and whose body has never been found, nor his murderers ever been brought to justice. I simply say to my right honourable friend that in answer to our honourable friend's earlier question, she talked about an amnesty. I must tell her that none of those who served have called for an amnesty. What they have called for is fairness and justice. Many, many old veterans now are finding, having been cleared decades ago, that the PSNI is now proceeding against them with no new evidence. Can I please ask her, will she answer me, how is it that I can say to my old colleagues that this government has not abandoned them?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend, we absolutely value the service that he and others did in Northern Ireland. This was a very difficult time for a part of the United Kingdom, and the work that the police did and that the armed forces did in Northern Ireland during that time was absolutely crucial. We are pleased that we've seen the peace that has come since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, but there was obviously much injury and loss of life during the Troubles. As I indicated earlier, around 3,500 people were killed during the Troubles. The vast majority of those were murdered by terrorists. My right honourable friend talks about a fair and just system. We want to ensure that there is a fair and just system that is working across the board to deal with these legacy issues. But what is happening at the moment is that there is a disproportionate emphasis in terms of cases that involve the police and the armed forces. There are cases involving terrorists that are being looked into, but I think people would recognise that there is a disproportionate emphasis on the police and armed forces. What is important is that we therefore bring in a system which has full support and which will enable people to see that fairness and justice being applied. That is what the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is working on. She has been working on that with the various political parties in Northern Ireland, and it is what we will, in due course, put forward. We recognise the sacrifice and the bravery and determination of our armed forces and the work they did in Northern Ireland, and we too want to see fairness and justice.
Karen Bach.
Speaker, it took time to get there, but the Prime Minister has now recognised that a no-deal Brexit is not a viable option. But she knows, as well as the rest of us, that many of her potential successors do not feel the same way. So can she tell us whether she agrees with her Brexit Secretary, amongst others, who thinks that we should be spending the coming months stepping up preparations for a no-deal Brexit, or with her Chancellor, who has issued an edict that no more Treasury money should be spent on preparing for a no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister.
As the Honourable Lady knows, there is only one way of this House ensuring that we leave the European Union without no deal, and that is to leave with a deal, and that is to support the second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill and take that process through this House. But the Honourable Lady, I'm sure, also knows that the legal default position continues to be no deal. Were we to get to the 31st of October situation, I want us to leave the EU before then, but were we to get to the 31st of October position, it will be a matter for the 27, not just for this country, to determine whether there was no deal or not, and that is why it is absolutely right that the government is continuing to make preparations for no deal.
Charles Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like so many people in this chamber, I want to see more monies for schools, hospitals, the police and transport. Is not the best way of doing this to agree a deal that allows us to legally exit the EU, thereby unlocking 3 years of pent-up investment sitting on the sidelines, seeking certainty that the Prime Minister is trying to deliver, and this party should be trying to deliver.
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. There is pent-up investment there. There are companies who've been holding investment back until they see the Brexit deal being resolved. And it is important that we do see that deal going through this House. Supporting the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is the way to ensure that we deliver the Brexit that the people voted for, and we do it in a way that Conservatives stood on in their manifesto at the last election, and actually that the Labour Party members stood on in their manifesto at the last election. Once we are over this, once we have left the European Union, then we will be able to take advantage not only of the deal dividend, but of that increased investment and see that bright future for our country.
Jeff Smith.
Mr. Speaker, as a Manchester MP, can I thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for their words of remembrance for the victims of the terrorist attack in our city 2 years ago. In the light of concerns expressed about delays in accessing compensation and the amounts offered to victims following the attack, will the Government give consideration, when the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme is reviewed this year, to establishing a separate government funding pot for victims of terrorist attacks, so it doesn't have to be taken from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority funding, and so we can give more flexible and immediate support to victims of terror attacks?
Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, the honourable gentleman has raised a very important point, and I recognise the force with which he's raised that and concern he has for those who were the victims of that terrible attack. And of course, sadly, in this country, we have seen too many people being victims of terrorist attacks. The Lord Chancellor has indicated that the Ministry of Justice is reviewing this situation. He has heard the specific proposal that the honourable gentleman has put forward, and I'm sure we'll take that into account in that review.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Returning to Northern Ireland, it's now 2.5 years that there's been no devolved government in Northern Ireland, and every week on the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, we hear about the impact of this on ordinary people, whether it's on quality issues, whether it's funding for the PSNI, whether it's a pay rise for teachers who are paid 6% less than there are teachers in the rest of the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is being left behind. Will the Prime Minister do all she can to restore devolution before the end of the year?
Prime Minister.
Can I give my honourable friend that reassurance? I am as keen as she is to ensure that we see the restoration of devolution in Northern Ireland. I believe that recently all the parties have come together with talks with the Secretary of State and as appropriate, the Irish Government, and are ensuring that those talks are continuing. Obviously, there are issues that need to be addressed, concerns from the political parties on different issues. Those need to be overcome such that we can see devolution restored, because as my honourable friend says, this is a matter for the people of Northern Ireland, and to ensure they have a devolved government that can ensure that good governance in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On 2 previous occasions, I've asked the Prime Minister to do more to support the victims of the leasehold scandal. Now that she's about to move house anytime soon, will the PM give that a little more focus and urgently address this issue and give leaseholders justice?
Prime Minister.
Well, honourable gentlemen, we have been listening to those who've raised concerns about this particular issue. Last year, of course, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, announced no new government funding scheme will be used to support the unjustified use of leasehold for new houses. We have had a technical consultation on how to improve the market for consumers. We're analysing the responses to that. We'll respond to that and the recent Select Committee report on leasehold reform shortly, and we will introduce legislation in due course.
Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, in reply to my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green, the Prime Minister quite rightly paid tribute to the 300,000 security personnel who, through their courage, professionalism and skill, maintained the rule of law, without which the Belfast Agreement would never have been signed.
Correct.
But she didn't quite answer his question. None of those people who served defending the rule of law want a blanket amnesty. What they want is a categorical assurance that the prosecuting authorities, within the existing framework of law, will not bring forward a fresh process, and that it is categorical, clear new evidence, and there is an assurance, and no doubt whatever, that a fair trial will proceed.
Well, can I say
Prime
to
Minister.
my right honourable friend, I absolutely appreciate the point that he and our right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Wood Green, has made in relation to this issue. The problem we face in Northern Ireland is that there have been a number of processes which have been aiming to deal with these issues and justice in relation to these deaths during the Troubles. But all of the processes that have been followed so far have been found to be flawed in some way. That is why it is necessary to go through this, the work that we have been doing, to find a process that will not be flawed, that will be legally supportable, and that will enable the fairness and justice that we all want to see to be brought to the fore.
Laura Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the 2017 election campaign, the Prime Minister acknowledged that our social care system is broken and promised to fix it. Yet, the CEO of a care provider in Crewe and Nantwich recently told me that the decision to cut sleep-in pay for care workers by up to £400 a month is a direct result of underfunding in the care sector. Will the Prime Minister consider bringing legislation to ensure sleep-in shifts attract at least the national living wage and provide the necessary funding to local authorities so that it is possible to give care workers the pay that they deserve?
Prime Minister.
This issue of sleeping cover and pay for sleeping cover has been one that the government has been dealing with. We have had to address this as a direct result of a court court case that was taken. We have been responding to that court case. I recognise the issue about the question of pay for sleep-in cover, and it's one. And in relation to the wider issue of social care, yes, we are going to bring forward proposals in relation to social care. We want to ensure that we have a sustainable social care system for the future.
Pauline Latham.
Would the Prime Minister welcome with me the launch of Radio Reminisce, a fantastic new dementia-friendly radio? It's a subscription-based radio service designed to help and comfort people over 70 with early onset dementia, produced and developed in Belper in my constituency.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I thank her for raising this issue and for raising the issue of support, particularly with people with early onset dementia, and for highlighting this new radio service. As she will know, the government is committed to double spending on research in dementia by 2020. But in relation to the radio service, this is obviously a very practical way of providing support for people with early onset dementia, and I'm happy to join my honourable friend in welcoming this excellent radio service. I'm sure it's going to provide very important help to those who are suffering with dementia.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister must be considering her legacy, and she said she wanted to correct burning injustice. So will she commit to supporting legislation such as that proposed by my honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull North, so that abortion in Northern Ireland becomes a health, not a criminal matter, and that as soon as possible women have equal rights across the whole of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
My view on what should happen in relation to abortion has been clear. I've made that clear in the past. But this is a devolved issue, and we believe this is something that should be addressed by the devolved administration in Northern Ireland, where that's restored.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, as we look forward to the visit by the President of the United States, will the Prime Minister... Will my right honourable friend agree with me that it is in the national interest that we support his visit, unite across the House and across the country to make a success of the visit, so that our special relationship endures and grows and supports the success of this country as we exit the EU?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, and he is absolutely right. We are looking forward to the state visit of the President of the United States. We are also looking forward to the fact that President Trump will be joining myself and other leaders to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. This is an important commemoration when we will be recognising, as I said earlier in response to the honourable member from Portsmouth, the sacrifice that was made by British armed forces, by American armed forces and others from so many other countries to ensure the freedom of Europe. And my honourable friend is also right. We have a deep and special relationship with the United States of America. It is important. That is our closest security and defence relationship, our deepest security and defence relationship. It is a relationship that has helped to keep peace around the world. It is one we want to see continuing, and every member of this House should welcome the President of the United States of America here to the UK.
Chris Law.
We have repeatedly heard from the Prime Minister, and it would be, and I quote, an unforgivable breach of trust in our democracy if we fail to deliver Brexit. Yet if the polls are correct, Scotland will be sending a clear message tomorrow that it wants to remain in Europe by increasing its number of SNP MEPs whilst wiping out the Tories. Should Scotland increase its number of pro-EU MEPs tomorrow, will the Prime Minister finally listen to the people of Scotland who want to determine their own future as an independent European nation, or will they breach their trust, leaving Scotland's people with Boris's Brexit Britain?
Well, I suggest if the honourable gentleman wants to listen to the people of Scotland and their view on their future, he actually starts listening to the decision they took in 2014 to remain part of the United Kingdom.
Dr. Philip Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If polling is to be believed, the winning party in tomorrow's Euro elections will be the Brexit Party. This party, in contrast to the Vote Leave campaign in 2016, has clearly stated that no-deal Brexit is its policy. On the basis of normal turnout, that means that between 6 and 7 million people will have voted for no deal, which begs the question, what of the other 10 million Brexit voters in 2016? It concerns me, and has long concerned me, that we don't have the consent here in this House to deliver the Brexit that is likely to emanate from this House. With that in mind, and I congratulate the Prime Minister on the first steps yesterday towards acknowledging this, can she commit towards reaching out across this House in order to bring about the vote which remains to take place, which is the choice between having a final say of the British public or a no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister.
I say to my honourable friend that I don't recognise actually the choice that he has set out, and for this reason. First of all, as I said earlier, I have not changed my view on a second referendum. I've been clear that I believe this House should be delivering on the result of the first referendum. And the choice that is before this House, I believe, is that whether or not it wants to deliver on the result of the first referendum and deliver on the manifestos on which the majority of members of this House stood, which were clear that we wanted to do that with a deal. We can do that. We can do that by giving second reading to the withdrawal agreement bill, seeing that bill through this House, seeing that bill get royal assent, ratify the treaty and leave the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Universal credit was today condemned again by the UN Special Rapporteur, who likened DWP policy to creating modern versions of 19th century workhouses. A leaked memo has revealed that the DWP is doubling down, promoting universal credit with an aggressive PR campaign, including a BBC documentary and adverts seen in today's Metro, which DWP officials state, and I quote, "won't look like DWP or universal credit, you won't see our branding, and this is deliberate." Prime Minister, how is it right that the DWP is spending hundreds and thousands of pounds on misleading adverts that promote a cruel policy, which is driving my constituents into debt, despair and destitution?
Prime Minister!
What the Department for Work and Pensions is doing is spending not just its resources but its effort, and I thank all the staff in DWP for this, in out there helping people into the workplace and ensuring that when they're in the workplace they are able to keep more of the money that they earn.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, the Prime Minister visited the fishing village of Mevagissey. I'm sure she remembers it because she bought me some chips for lunch. The people of Mevagissey now face losing their only GP surgery because the remaining doctor there has given notice to hand back the contract to the NHS. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree with me that it is vital that these rural coastal communities retain their primary care services. So what more can the government do to attract GPs to rural and coastal communities, and will she use her offices to ensure everything possible is done to make sure Mevagissey keeps its GP service?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for reminding me of the visit to the beautiful Mevagissey, and also reminding him about the very good chips that I think he and I both shared on that occasion. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right about the importance of GPs to local communities, and I recognise the concerns that there are in Mevagissey on this issue. What we are doing is giving additional incentives to attract GP trainees into areas that are previously hard to recruit areas, such as rural and coastal communities. But I'm sure that a minister from the Department of Health and Social Care will be happy to meet my honourable friend to discuss this particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over 2 years now, the victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse in Northern Ireland have been waiting for justice and compensation following the independent report of Mr. Justice Hart, or ex-Justice Hart. The fact of the matter is many of them are dying without seeing the compensation come through. The NIO's policy of refusing to do anything in Northern Ireland, even when it has cross-community and cross-party support, has now come to the culmination of victims of abuse dying without seeing justice. This has got to stop. Will the Prime Minister intervene and make sure that action is taken to get immediate action for these victims?
Well, can I say to the Prime Minister, I fully appreciate the extent of concern that there is about this issue. Of course, we also have our independent inquiry into child sexual abuse here in England and Wales, and I recognise that the impact on all those who've been victims of this sort of abuse, we call it historical. The investigation is referred to as historical investigation. For those who have been victims, it is not historical. It rests with them for the rest of their life. I recognise the concern about the issue that he has raised. Obviously, if the Northern Ireland Executive were in place, this would be a matter that the Northern Ireland Executive would be... No, it would be a matter the Northern Ireland Executive would be addressing. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, has been looking at this issue, and I will discuss with her what response can be given on what I recognise is a matter of deep concern to many people in Northern Ireland.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question to the Prime Minister from a Northern Ireland veteran. He is Royal Marine David Griffin, a Dublin-born Irish Catholic who joined the British Army, transferred to the Royal Marines. In 1972 in Belfast, he killed an IRA gunman who was about to assassinate one of his comrades at a guard post. 47 years later, he is now being investigated by the PSNI. He is watching these proceedings now, Prime Minister, from his home at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. He asked me to ask you this. I served my Queen and country in uniform for over 20 years, and I was commended for my service in Northern Ireland. Acting under the lawful orders of my officer commanding, I killed a terrorist who was about to murder one of my comrades, and yet I'm being investigated as if I were a criminal. The IRA have letters of comfort. We don't. Why, Prime Minister, are you pandering to Sinn Féin IRA while throwing veterans like me to the wolves? What is your answer, Prime Minister, to this Chelsea pensioner and all the veterans he represents?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, he has put his case and that of the veteran he's represented, a Chelsea pensioner, and we thank that individual, as we do all those who served in Northern Ireland, for their bravery and the determination with which they acted in Northern Ireland, which, as my right honourable friend earlier said, former Northern Ireland Secretary said, enabled the peace that we see today in Northern Ireland to take place. It is not the case that the terrorists have an amnesty currently. If there is evidence of... No, if there is, it has been made very clear that evidence of criminal activity will be investigated and people should be brought to justice. What I want to ensure... What I want to ensure is that we do have a fair and just system. At the moment, I do not believe the system is operating fairly. I don't want to see a system where there is an amnesty for terrorists. I want to see a system where investigations can take place in a lawful manner, where the results of those investigations can be upheld and will not be reopened in the future. And in order to do that, we need to change the current system, and that is what we will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few days, I've received distressed emails from a number of constituents who are EU citizens living in the UK, but who won't be able to vote tomorrow. Their predicament arises because of the Prime Minister's government's late decision to participate in the elections, which didn't give many EU citizens enough time to fill out the necessary form declaring that they won't be voting elsewhere. Will the Prime Minister use all the power of her office to take immediate steps this afternoon to make sure that the necessary form is made available at polling stations tomorrow so that EU citizens living in the United Kingdom won't be disenfranchised?
UK citizens, well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that we take every step to make sure that those who are entitled to vote in elections are indeed able to do so. But can I just say, she says it was a late decision by the government to enter into the European elections. Of course, that decision was taken because of a decision by this House not to agree on the 29th of March that we would agree the deal such that it would not have been necessary to hold European elections.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the Prime Minister in this House is beginning to understand the level of fury of veterans in this country when it comes to their treatment by this place over the years. But the most disturbing part of last weekend is this insinuation of equivocation between those who got up in the morning to go and murder women and children and civilians, and those who donned a uniform to go and protect the Crown. Can the Prime Minister take this opportunity now to tell the nation she sees no equivocation whatsoever between those two groups, and that the line that preferential treatment should not be given to veterans is not right?
Can I say to my honourable friend, it is absolutely clear, I would have hoped from everything that I have said at this dispatch box, that I value the sacrifice, the bravery, the commitment of our armed forces, whose work in Northern Ireland, alongside the police in Northern Ireland and others, enabled us to get to the stage today that we have the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the peace that we have had in Northern Ireland for many years now, and long may that continue. There is no question of equating that bravery and that sacrifice with the acts of terrorists. But what I would also say to my honourable friend is that what he is, I think, from implication of his question, urging me to do is to put into place a system which would equate terrorists with members of the armed forces. Any statute of limitations, any amnesty that is put into place would, as a matter of law, have to apply across the board. I do not want to see, and I will not see, an amnesty for the terrorists.
Nick Deakin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for recognising the impact on steelworkers and their families of the devastating news that British Steel has gone into liquidation, and also thank her for recognising the high quality of work that they do on Teesside, Skinning Grove and indeed in Scunthorpe in my constituency. Will she meet with MPs cross-party affected by this, and so that we can look together about how best to make sure this great industry moves forward in the future serving this country?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, as I said earlier, I recognise this is a worrying time for his constituents and others, and the government has been looking actively at what we can do. As I say, we've given the support we did through the ETS agreement, but haven't been able lawfully to give the further support that was requested. But I'll certainly meet with him and a group of MPs to consider this issue. This is about one company owned by Grey Bull Capital, but obviously we have taken steps in the past to ensure that we continue to have a steel industry in the United Kingdom, and we will want to look at that wider issue.
Order. Just before we come to the statement by the Prime Minister, I think it is fitting, colleagues, for me to refer again to something that was mentioned at the start of questions to the Prime Minister today by the Leader of the Opposition. 3 trawlers set out from Hull during January and February of 1968 and never returned, leading to the loss of 58 lives. Yvonne Marie Blenkinsop is the last surviving member of a group of women from Hull who became known following that tragedy as the Headscarf Revolutionaries. The women campaigned for better protection for their husbands, fathers, brothers and sons. Through their actions, countless lives have been saved. I am reliably informed that Yvonne Marie Blenkinsop is with us today observing our proceedings. We salute her and her fellow women, and we extend the warmest welcome to her to the House of Commons. Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, before I make my statement, may I too recognise the work of Yvonne Marie Blenkinsop and others, and indeed all those over the years who have campaigned to ensure that those in the workplace can have the degree of safety and security that they need. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the government's work to deliver Brexit by putting forward a new deal that members of this House can stand behind. We need to see Brexit through, to honour the result of the referendum and to deliver the change the British people so clearly demanded. I sincerely believe that most members of this House feel the same, that for all our division and disagreement, we believe in democracy, that we want to make good on the promise we made to the British people when we asked them to decide on the future of our EU membership. As to how we make that happen, recent votes have shown that there is no majority in this House for leaving with no deal, and this House has voted against revoking Article 50. It is clear that the only way forward is leaving with a deal, but it is equally clear that this will not happen without compromise on all sides of the debate. That starts with the government, which is why we've just held 6 weeks of detailed talks with the opposition, talks that the Leader of the Opposition chose to end before a formal agreement was reached, but which nonetheless revealed areas of common ground. And having listened to the opposition, to other party leaders, to the devolved administrations, to business leaders, trade unionists and others, we're now making a 10-point offer to members across the House. 10 changes that address the concerns raised by honourable and right honourable members. 10 binding commitments that will be enshrined in legislation so they cannot simply be ignored. And 10 steps that will bring us closer to the bright future that awaits our country once we end the political impasse and get Brexit done. First, we will protect British jobs by seeking as close to frictionless trade in goods with the EU as possible while outside the single market and ending free movement. The government will be placed under a legal duty to negotiate our future relationship on this basis. Second, we will provide much-needed certainty for our vital manufacturing and agricultural sectors by keeping up to date with EU rules for goods and agri-food products that are relevant to checks at the border. Such a commitment, which will also be enshrined in legislation, will help protect thousands of skilled jobs that depend on just-in-time supply chains. Third, we will empower Parliament to break the deadlock over future customs arrangements. Both the government and opposition agree that we must have as close as possible to frictionless trade at the UK-EU border, protecting the jobs and livelihoods that are sustained by our existing trade with the EU. But while we agree on the ends, we disagree on the means. The government has already put forward a proposal which delivers the benefits of a customs union, but with the ability for the UK to determine its own trade and development policy. The opposition are both sceptical of our ability to negotiate that and don't believe an independent trade policy is in the national interest. They would prefer a comprehensive customs union with a UK say in EU trade policy, but with the EU negotiating on our behalf. As part of the cross-party discussions, the government offered a compromise option of a temporary customs union on goods only, including a UK say in relevant EU trade policy, so that the next government can decide its preferred direction. But we were not able to reach agreement. So instead, we will commit in law to let Parliament decide this issue and to reflect the outcome of this process in legislation. Fourth, to address concerns that a future government could roll back hard-won protections for employees, we will publish a new workers' rights bill. As I've told the House many times, successive British administrations of all colours have granted British workers rights and protections well above the standards demanded by Brussels. But I know that people want guarantees, and I'm happy to provide them. If passed by Parliament, this bill will guarantee that the rights enjoyed by British workers can be no less favourable than those of their counterparts in the EU, both now and in the future. And we will discuss further amendments with trade unions and business. Fifth, the new Brexit deal will also guarantee there will be no change in the level of environmental protection when we leave the EU, and we will establish a new and wholly independent Office of Environmental Protection, able to uphold standards and enforce compliance. Sixth, the withdrawal agreement bill will place a legal duty on government to seek changes to the political declaration that will be needed to reflect this new deal. I'm confident we will be successful in doing so. Seventh, the government will include in the withdrawal agreement bill, at introduction, a requirement to vote on whether to hold a second referendum. I've made my own view clear on this many times. I am against a second referendum. We should be implementing the result of the first referendum, not asking the British people to vote in a second one. What would it say about our democracy if the biggest vote in our history were to be rerun because this House didn't like the outcome? What would it do to that democracy, and what forces would it unleash? But I recognise the genuine and sincere strength of feeling across the House on this important issue. So to those MPs who want a second referendum to confirm the deal, I say you need a deal and therefore a withdrawal agreement bill to make it happen. Let it have its second reading and then make your case to Parliament. If this House votes for a referendum, it would be requiring the government to make provisions for such a referendum, including legislation if it wanted to ratify the withdrawal agreement. Eighth, Parliament will be guaranteed a much greater role in the second part of the Brexit process, the negotiations over our future relationship with the EU. In line with the proposal put forward by the honourable members for Wigan and Stoke-on-Trent Central, the new Brexit deal will set out in law that the House of Commons will approve the UK's objectives for the negotiations, and MPs will also be asked to approve the treaty governing that relationship before the government signs it. Ninth, the new Brexit deal will legally oblige the government to seek to conclude the alternative arrangements process by December 2020, avoiding any need for the Northern Ireland backstop coming into force. This commitment is made in the spirit of the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, passed by this House on the 29th of January. And while it is not possible to use alternative arrangements to replace the backstop in the withdrawal agreement, we will ensure they are a viable alternative. And finally, 10th, we will ensure that, should the backstop come into force, Great Britain will stay aligned with Northern Ireland. We will prohibit the proposal that a future government could split Northern Ireland off from the UK's customs territory, and we will deliver on our commitments to Northern Ireland in the December 2017 joint report in full. We will implement paragraph 50 of the joint report in law. The Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive will have to give their consent on a cross-community basis for new regulations which are added to the backstop. And we will work with our confidence and supply partners on how these commitments should be entrenched in law, so that Northern Ireland cannot be separated from the United Kingdom. Following the end of EU election purdah, the withdrawal agreement bill will be published on Friday, so the House has the maximum possible time to study its detail. If Parliament passes the bill before the summer recess, the UK will leave the EU by the end of July. We will be out of the EU political structures, out of ever closer union. We will stop British laws being enforced by a European court. We will end free movement. We will stop making vast annual payments to the EU budget. By any definition, that alone is delivering Brexit. And by leaving with a deal, we can do so much more besides. We can protect jobs, guarantee workers' rights, maintain the close security partnerships that do so much to keep us all safe. We will ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And we can bring an end to the months, years of increasingly bitter argument and division that have both polarised and paralysed our politics. We can move on, move forwards, and get on with the jobs we were sent here to do, what we got into politics to do. That is what we can achieve if we support this new deal. Reject it, and all we have before us is division and deadlock. We risk leaving with no deal, something this House is clearly against. We risk stopping Brexit altogether, something the British people would simply not tolerate. We risk creating further divisions. We risk creating further divisions at a time when we need to be acting together in the national interest. And we guarantee a future in which our politics become still more polarised and voters increasingly despair as they see us failing to do what they asked of us. None of us want to see that happen. The opportunity of Brexit is too large and the consequences of failure too grave to risk further delay. So in the weeks ahead, there will be opportunities for MPs on all sides to have their say, to table amendments, to shape the Brexit they and their constituents want to see. Mr. Speaker, in time, another Prime Minister will be standing at this dispatch box. But while I am here, I have a duty to be clear with the House. I have a duty to be clear with the House about the facts. If we are going to deliver Brexit in this Parliament, we are going to have to pass a withdrawal agreement bill. And we will not do so without holding votes on the issues that have divided us the most. That includes votes on customs arrangements, and on a second referendum. We can pretend otherwise and carry on arguing and getting nowhere. But in the end, our job in this House is to take decisions, not to duck them. So I will put those decisions to this House, because that is my duty, and because it is the only way that we can deliver Brexit. So let's demonstrate what this House can achieve. Let's come together, honour the referendum, deliver what we promised the British people, and build a successful future for our whole country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of this statement. In fact, I received it yesterday when the Prime Minister made an appeal entitled Seeking Common Ground in Parliament. And where did she make that appeal? Not in Parliament, but in a small room just down the road. Mr. Speaker, it's now clear the bold New Deal the Prime Minister promised is little more than a repackaged version of her 3 times rejected deal. The rhetoric may have changed, but the deal has not. I thank the Prime Minister for her letter. It offers no change on a customs union, no change on single market alignment, and no dynamic alignment on environmental protections. This government is too weak, too divided to get this country out of the mess that they have created. For over 2 years, the Prime Minister bullishly refused to consult the public or Parliament. She did not seek a compromise until after she had missed her own deadline to leave. And by the time she finally did, she had lost the authority to deliver. That became evident during the 6 weeks of cross-party talks that ended last week. Talks that were entered into constructively on both sides to see if a compromise was possible. But, Mr. Speaker, while those talks are going on, Cabinet Minister after Cabinet Minister made statements undermining what their colleagues in the room were offering. The Foreign Secretary, Leader of the House, International Trade Secretary and Treasury Chief Secretary all made clear they would not tolerate a deal which included a customs union. While Tory leadership contender after Tory leadership contender took it in turns to make it absolutely clear that any compromise deal would not be honoured. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, no matter what the Prime Minister offers, it's clear no compromise would survive the upcoming Tory leadership contest. The multiple leaks reported from the Cabinet yesterday show the Prime Minister couldn't even get the compromise deal she wanted through her own Cabinet. And it's clear that the shrunken offer that emerged satisfied no one. Not her own backbenchers, not the DUP, and, Mr. Speaker, not the official opposition either. No Labour MP can vote for a deal on the promise of a Prime Minister who only has days left in her job. And even if the Prime Minister could honour her promises, the deal she is putting before us does not represent a genuine compromise. Her 10-point plan is riddled with contradiction and wishful thinking. Firstly, the Prime Minister pretends she's delivering something new with a temporary customs union. This isn't a compromise, it's just accepting the reality. Under the withdrawal agreement, we will already be in a temporary customs union through the transition period, which can last for up to 4 years. And if not, we will enter the backstop, which in effect keeps us in a customs union too, without any say. Secondly, why would this House legislate for a plan which has already been comprehensively rejected by the European Union? The government wants to align with the European Union on goods to keep frictionless trade, while at the same time wants to pursue trade deals which would undermine this process. It's simply not compatible. The technology they need to continue to pursue their Chequers plan simply doesn't exist. It's already been ruled by the EU as illegal, impractical, and an invitation to fraud. And, Mr. Speaker, The government has failed to provide any economic analysis to show this would make us better off. Why would the House support such a chaotic and desperate approach? Labour set out a sensible compromise plan over a year ago, including a comprehensive and permanent customs union with the EU that gives us a say, that would allow us to strike trade deals as part of the world's biggest trading bloc, bring investment while maintaining the highest standards. It's credible and achievable, and the best way to protect industry, manufacturing of jobs, something this government is woefully indifferent to, as the latest crisis in the steel industry shows today. The government must be prepared to step in and take a public stake to save thousands of high-skilled jobs at British Steel, a foundation industry for any major economy. Instead, the Tory obsession is for striking trade deals with the likes of Donald Trump. They prioritise chlorinated chicken, further NHS privatisation and deregulation over protecting supply chains and jobs in this country. On workers' rights, Mr. Speaker, we have yet to see the full package the government intends to bring forward. But many in the trade union movement remain very sceptical. As Frances O'Grady of the Trade Union Congress said yesterday, and I quote, "This reheated Brexit deal won't protect people's jobs and rights." On environmental protections, it's clear the Prime Minister is not offering dynamic alignment, and that under her proposals, the United Kingdom would fall behind in a number of areas, with only a toothless regulator under the control of the Environment Secretary in place of binding international commitments to protect our environment. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of a confirmatory vote, I'm sure nobody here will be fooled by what the Prime Minister is offering. Will the Prime Minister tell us now if this offer is genuine? Will she give her party a free vote on this issue, or will she, as before, whip against a confirmatory referendum? If the government truly believes this is the best deal for the economy and for jobs, they should not fear putting that to the people. Mr. Speaker, for too long our politics has been seen through a prism of leave or remain. This is dividing our society and poisoning our democracy. It means vital issues are being neglected, the crisis in our schools and hospitals, the housing crisis, and the cruelty of the social security policy and universal credit. Our country needs leadership to bring us together. However, this Prime Minister is not the person to do that. Throughout the last 3 years, she's made no attempt to unite the country. She's been focused only on keeping her divided party together, and it hasn't worked. And her time has now run out. She no longer has the authority to offer a compromise and cannot deliver. That's why it's time for a general election to break the Brexit deadlock and give the country a say.
Prime Minister!
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think the game was actually given away by the Right Honourable Gentleman when he made it absolutely clear that as far as he is concerned, the way to get this through the House is for everybody else to compromise to his plan and only his plan. In his statement, he was very clear that he was not making any proposals to compromise. The government has indeed compromised. We have recognised that there are issues on which this House will need to decide, and that is the plain fact. There are different opinions across this House on the two key issues of the future customs arrangement and the second referendum. I've made my position very clear on these. The government has set out its position, but it is for this House to decide, and the best vehicle to do this is within the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. So then this House can finally make its mind up as to what it wants the future customs arrangement to be and as to whether it thinks there should be a second referendum. He talks about free votes on a second referendum. Well, of course, in the indicative vote process that went through, we did indeed give Conservative members a free vote on this issue, and the second referendum was rejected across the House. He talks about he has some inaccurate comments. He talked about the environmental regulator. It will be an independent body which is able to hold the government to account on the issue of environmental standards. I think he showed his blinkered view on trade when what he sets out is, as far as he seems to be concerned, the only issue, the only people he wants to trade with are European Union. Actually, what we want to see is a good trade deal with the EU and good trade deals with other countries around the world. That is the best way forward for the United Kingdom. And he talked about British Steel, and I've answered in response to questions in PMQs on British Steel and what the government is doing. He talks about the Labour position of wanting a comprehensive customs union and of wanting all that dynamic alignment and that single market. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that what the Labour Party wants to achieve in its relationship with the EU would make it even harder for a British government to take action to protect industries like the steel industry. He himself has always complained about state aid rules, but he would be wanting to tie himself into those state aid rules by what he is proposing for the future. But then, of course, what we see, he talks about different opinions. He talks about different opinions across this House. Of course, the one issue that has never properly been resolved in this House, and which the Withdrawal Agreement Bill would force to be resolved in this House, is whether the right honourable gentleman himself is for Brexit or against it. If he is for Brexit, he will vote for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Voting against the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is voting against Brexit.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that this morning her Environment Secretary was on the radio, and when asked whether this was certain that this second reading would be brought back to Parliament, he didn't answer in the affirmative. He said they would take reflections and they would listen. My question, therefore, to the Prime Minister is, having presented this at the dispatch box, is she absolutely certain now that she will bring this bill back to the House for a second reading? And if so, could she name the date now and then say she would stick to it?
To my right honourable friend, we've already made the government's position clear in relation to this, that the second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be brought to the House after the Whitsun recess.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is customary to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement. It was some surprise that we all saw the statement being delivered not in the House of Commons but elsewhere yesterday. Can I ask the Prime Minister why we didn't follow the usual protocol and Parliament is the first to hear such statements from the Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, let me give the Prime Minister some friendly advice. This deal is dead. Stop this charade and let's get on with putting the decision back to the people once and for all. The headlines this morning cry of doom. The benches opposite concentrate on ways to mount a leadership coup, and where are they? That's exactly what they're doing this afternoon, because they're not here to support the Prime Minister. This is no way to run a government. The Prime Minister is asking MPs to vote for a deal that takes Scotland out of the single market and eventually out of the customs union. This simply cannot be allowed to happen. This is a rookie government attempting to blackmail MPs. Look behind the smoke and mirrors. A new revised deal that hasn't even been negotiated with Brussels. A second EU referendum, but only if you vote for the bill. A possible temporary customs union which a future UK government could change and the European Union have dismissed. A trade tariff arrangement which the former UK representative to the EU has described as the definition of insanity. Mr. Speaker, none of what the Prime Minister announced yesterday was discussed with the devolved government in Edinburgh. This really goes to the heart of the problem. In December 2016, the Scottish Government published a compromise position. This was rejected without discussion. Scotland's voice has been ignored time and time again. Brexit has meant our power stripped away from the Scottish Parliament. There is no respect for the devolved administrations by this government. Westminster has ignored Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this is a sorry mess. Look around. There is no support for the Prime Minister's deal. Prime Minister, this deal faces an even bigger defeat than the last vote. Tomorrow, communities will make their voice heard in our democratic European election. Mr. Speaker, a vote for the Scottish National Party is a vote to stop Brexit, a vote to stop this economic madness, a vote to respect Scotland's decision in 2016. The Prime Minister has lost the confidence of her party. Parliament will not support her, and she has lost the trust of the people. It is time, Prime Minister, to go. Will you do it?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think he talks about the discussions with the Scottish Government. Of course, there have been many discussions with the Scottish Government. Both I have met the First Minister, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has held a number of meetings. The Scottish Government, the devolved administrations have been party to the debates and discussions that have been taking place. But can I just say this to the right honourable gentleman? He says that a vote for the Scottish nationalists is a vote not to leave the European Union. Well, a vote for the Scottish nationalists is a vote to betray our democracy, a vote to betray the view of the people of the United Kingdom. People asked us in this House to deliver Brexit. We have a responsibility to do that. The question is how we do that. The Withdrawal Agreement Bill gives the opportunity to debate those issues about how we do that. And I say to the right honourable gentleman that this House should have those debates, come to the decision, stop ducking the issues and get on with the job the British people instructed us to do.
Sir John Redwood.
What does the Prime Minister say to the many members of the public who think the government should have kept its promise to take us out on the 29th of March, with or without the draft treaty? And what does she say to those millions of angry Leave voters who do not see the agreement as any kind of Brexit, but a lock-in for many, many months with no clear way out?
Can I say, with the greatest of respect to my right honourable friend, that what I would say to those voters who expected us to leave on the 29th of March is that the government's position was that we should leave on the 29th of March. The majority of the government benches voted for us to leave on the 29th of March. Sadly, the opposition and some others voted to keep us in at that date.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Given that this bill appears to have been sunk even before its publication, the Prime Minister must know that the only way now to break the deadlock, which, as today's terrible news at British Steel shows, is damaging our economy, is to put the choice back to the British people.
Absolutely right.
So can I urge her at this 11th hour to take that one final step, to change her mind and to say that she will support a confirmatory referendum?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, as I've indicated in a number of answers to questions this afternoon, I have not changed my view on the issue of a second referendum. I do believe we should be reflecting the views, putting into place the views of the people in the first referendum that took place on this issue. But I recognise there is a strength of feeling in this House on this issue, including from the right honourable gentleman and others particularly on his benches, and that is why it is important that we are able in this House to determine this issue. That is best done through the passage of the bill, through the passage of the withdrawal agreement bill, and that is why I said what I did yesterday. It's why I have said what I have done today on confirming that there will be a vote on a second referendum, whether to hold a second referendum in the withdrawal agreement bill. The government's position will be clear, that we don't think it right to hold a second referendum, but it will be for members of this House to be able to come together and to determine that view. And for those who believe there should be a second referendum, to be able to put their case to the House and for the House to come to its decision.
Mr. William Cash.
The Prime Minister tells us that if MPs vote for the withdrawal agreement bill, which we haven't even seen, let alone the amendments that are going to be put down to it, then we would leave the European Union by the 31st of July. How on earth does she know?
Because I've been discussing, and business managers have been discussing a timetable for putting this bill through, and the timetable for, obviously, a business motion, programme motion, has to be agreed in this House. But it is very clear, and the result of the determination of the last European Council makes it clear that on the timetable that we would be possible to put through, bringing the bill back for second reading in the after the Whitsun recess, it would enable us to do exactly what I said and leave the European Union on the 31st of July.
Yvette Cooper.
Given the awful news about British steel, it's crucial that the government stands up for British manufacturing. The Prime Minister will know that a customs union is immensely important to manufacturing across the North and Midlands, and also that industry needs a long-term deal to support investment. So given the reports coming out of Cabinet yesterday, can she tell us, has the Cabinet ruled out a long-term customs union being part of the future partnership with the EU that they are supposedly going to negotiate after this withdrawal agreement? Have they ruled out a long-term customs union, yes or no?
Can I say, first of all, to the Right Honourable Lady, she referenced what has happened to Greybull Capital's company, British Steel. She will be aware, as others will, that there are a number of issues, a number of challenges that are facing the steel industry, not just here in the UK, but globally. And part of that, of course, is the overcapacity issue, because supply is outstripping demand, and of course much of the excess production is coming from China. That is why in the G20 3 years ago, we acted to bring China around the table to try and deal with that issue. She asks about the long term. The compromise solution that I put forward and referenced in my statement on the customs is designed to ensure that a future government can take that issue in the direction that it wishes to take it, and for the House to determine what those negotiating objectives should be. What matters to our manufacturing industry is the frictions that take place at the border and having the benefits of the customs union in no tariffs, in no quotas. That is exactly what is already in the political declaration, the benefits of the customs union. And as I say, we're committed to ensuring that trade is as frictionless as possible.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It's quite difficult to make any judgments about a bill when it hasn't been published. And if there were issues with PERDA, then the announcement should not have been made this week. Next week, this House is in a recess, which is very nice for all of us, but it's not needed, given the seriousness of the situation. I will probably vote for the bill when it comes back, but please can I ask the Prime Minister to reflect very carefully on whether it should be put to Parliament, because the consequences of it not being passed are very serious. And if she really wants to heal the divisions and to get on with it, I would ask her to reflect very seriously about this bill not being put to Parliament early June and being allowed more compromise, more time being taken.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that she is right that if the bill is not passed, then this House will be faced with a very stark choice, and that choice will be whether they go for no deal or whether they go for something which is either revoking Article 50 or a second referendum, with the intention that many have in asking for a second referendum to stop Brexit. And that will be the choice that will face this House, which is why I say And people talk about the compromises that have been made so far. There are people who are telling me that I have compromised too much in the package that's been put forward. Others who are telling me I have not compromised enough in the package that has been put forward. At some stage, the House has to come together and we have to go and decide the distance that we will go together in order to deliver Brexit and deliver on what people asked us to do.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has referred a lot in this statement and yesterday to the new deal, the new Brexit deal, but isn't it a fact that the deal itself hasn't changed? The treaty is as it is, and these are a series of domestic legislative provisions to try to mitigate what is, in some cases, a very bad deal, but won't actually change the Brexit deal itself. And to illustrate that, the alternative arrangements proposal which he has put forward seeks merely to legally oblige the government to conclude its own processes, but would she confirm that there's absolutely no obligation on the European Union to agree alternative arrangements, and indeed the final decision as to whether they accept them or view them as reasonable is entirely a matter for them. It won't even be a matter of objective assessment. If a member state government decides that they'd rather keep us in the customs union, then that's what will happen. There will be no means of getting out of it.
I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that we have put forward to the House today a package of proposals. It is a new package of proposals. The Right Honourable Gentleman has been clear that in relation to the operation of the backstop, one of his key concerns was making that UK-wide. That commitment is there in the statement that I have made today, and as I've said, we are happy to sit down and discuss how we can ensure that these are enshrined in law, which I know has always been an issue of concern to the Right Honourable Gentleman. As regards the alternative arrangements, the groups to do that work being set up by government, the money being afforded by government to do that work. But the European Union were clear, and they have committed themselves in the legally binding commitments that have been made at recent council meetings, that they will also work with us to ensure that those alternative arrangements are in place and are available by end December 2020.
Owen Paterson.
Speaker, have the European Union agreed to any changes to the withdrawal agreement which are legally binding in international law?
I told you. I have said to my right honourable friend and others on many occasions, and the EU Council has made it clear on many occasions, that they are not reopening the withdrawal agreement. What we have done in the processes that we have that we took through the House up until now, into the most recent discussions with the European Union, is being able to have certain legally binding commitments made by both the UK and the European Union, in addition to the text of the withdrawal agreement, which cover a number of issues that have been of concern to people in this House.
Ms. Kendall.
Does the Prime Minister understand that she will not get enough support from members on this side of the House to allow her withdrawal agreement to pass unless she includes a confirmatory vote on the face of the bill? She has come to the end of the road. But if she, and indeed any Conservative MP, who wants to stop the Prime Minister's successor from inevitably pursuing a no-deal Brexit, they must back giving the public the final say. Time is running out. Prime Minister, please change your mind.
Can I say, this is an issue on which, as I say, there are very strong feelings across this House. I have met with members from all sides of this House who support a second referendum and have put forward their case with their sincere belief in that second referendum. I have a different view. I do believe we should be delivering on the first referendum, but I believe this is, because of the strength of view across this House, on both sides of the argument, it's important that the House has the opportunity properly to consider it in a way that is appropriate, and that is through the withdrawal agreement bill.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the ironies of resigning from government is it gives you rather more freedom and emphasis when you choose to support the government rather than just oppose it. And I will be supporting the Prime Minister's bill. Can I thank her for her efforts and ask her to recognise there are still many people in the country who believe that the best future for the UK outside the EU is with a compromise deal based on the interests of both, rather than a reckless and increasingly bitter pursuit of a single type of no-deal leaving, at the cost to many businesses, to industry, to agriculture, and a cost to the country, so expertly skewered by the Chancellor in his speech yesterday.
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I do indeed agree with him that I think there are many people across this country who want to see us leaving the EU in an orderly way and with a deal. And indeed, that was the manifesto on which he and I and those of us who sit here as Conservatives stood at the last election. We stood to deliver the best possible deal for Britain as we leave the European Union, delivered by a smooth, orderly Brexit, with a new, deep and special partnership, including a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union. Those are the objectives that I have been pursuing. I've put forward today a new package that does change the situation that has been voted on previously, and I hope all those who want to leave the European Union with a deal will indeed support it.
Tim Farron.
Speaker, in 1992, the Prime Minister and I toured the working men's clubs of North West Durham, and I was hugely impressed with her resilience in front of audiences that were as hostile to her as they were indifferent to me. But it turns out that the audience behind her is tougher still. She will fail in her bid in 2 weeks' time because people behind her who are for Brexit refuse to vote for Brexit. That is not her fault, but it is her problem. So for old time's sake, I want to help her out. If she will agree to put her deal, which to be fair to her is the only concrete version of Brexit we have yet seen, to the British people in a confirmatory vote, then I will join her in the lobbies. Will she help me to help her?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, and I fondly remember those days in 1992 up in North West Durham, but can I also say to him that I think if this House does not pass the withdrawal agreement bill, if this House does not enable the treaty to be ratified, then what this House is saying is that it does not want to leave the European Union with a deal. I believe the majority of people in this House do want to leave with a deal. This is the vehicle to do it.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, may I correct my right honourable friend on 2 points that she's made today. The first, she said that it was up to the House to decide about a customs union and a second referendum. Can I correct her? It is not up to MPs to decide that. The country decided to leave the EU. It's as simple as that. It's not for the House. And the second point, when she responded to my right honourable friend from Wokingham, she said that we couldn't have left the EU on the 29th of March. The legal position was that we could, but that she, and dare I say, a very heavily Remain cabinet, decided not to take us out.
Can I say to my honourable friend that I and my colleagues across government voted to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. We continue to believe that the best way to leave the European Union is with a deal. That is the manifesto on which my honourable friend and I both stood in the last general election, and I believe it's important that we recognise that and that we deliver that for the British people. The point that he makes about whether it is for the House to decide, the British people voted to leave. I have been trying to leave the European Union. I am looking forward to voting a fourth time to leave the European Union in the withdrawal agreement bill. Sadly, opposition members and some of my colleagues have not voted alongside me in that way. But how we do that is a matter for this House, because the deal has to be ratified by this House, and government and this House have to determine what the objectives for the next stage of negotiations are going to be. Now, I've been clear that those negotiations will be taken forward by somebody else leading this government. But what I'm also clear about is you can't get on to those second stage of negotiations until you get over the first stage. That's what the bill's about.
George Howarth.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's statement referred rightly to the need to avoid the risks that are inherent in the Brexit process. But doesn't she realise that her latest proposals actually hardwire those risks into the process themselves?
If the right honourable gentleman is talking about the issues on which there is a significant division in this House, namely customs and a second referendum, and taking those through in the withdrawal agreement bill, what the government is doing is committing to ensure that those issues can be addressed during the passage of the bill. The reality is, in the way legislation works in this House, that any bill brought before the House, people would put amendments, and and amendments could be seen on a whole range of issues, including those issues. But the key issue is what is determined by this House in response to those issues. This House will have to come to a decision.
Mr. David Jones.
Speaker, on the basis of the negotiations thus far, what arrangements alternative to the Irish backstop does my right honourable friend consider are most capable of agreement?
Well, a set of proposals have been put before the European Union, which have a number of elements in them, bringing together both technological approaches, some of which can be, I think, improved as we see technology developing, but also the key issues that have been for debate so far and discussion so far are those around elements of the derogation from EU law, which would be necessary in order to enable the alternative arrangements to provide for the no-hard border in the way that both sides intend it to do.
Ms. Savile-Roberts.
With respect, the Prime Minister is asking us to put our faith in her deal as, frankly, authority is slipping from her grasp with every passing hour. The Tories have had 3 years to agree a deal among themselves, including weeks of full-on collaboration with Labour, yet there's no guarantee she'll be in a place to bring this bill back next month. How, therefore, can we believe there's any guarantee of a people's vote when she cannot even bring herself to put it on the face of the bill?
Well, can I say to the right honourable lady, she and I have a different view on the issue of a second referendum, but what I'm saying is that that is an issue which we will make sure that this House is able to determine. The right honourable lady wants to ensure there's a people's vote, but it will be for this House to decide whether or not. Now, it's already been rejected by this House, but it will be for the House to come to a decision on that issue and the House to accept that decision.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We cannot continue to leave our country in this uncertainty. This has to stop. The whole House needs to stop saying no to everything on the table just because it's not our favourite dish. The EU negotiations, actually, they need to stop saying no to every time we have an issue as well. But we have to end this uncertainty. If we vote for this bill, we can move on and the discussions on the next stage can start. But, Prime Minister, what happens if we say no again?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that we do need to be able to move on, and we can move on while respecting the wish of the British people by taking this bill through, by ensuring that we ratify and that we leave the European Union. If this House chooses not to take this bill forward, then it is facing itself with a choice as to whether it wants no deal or no Brexit. That is the choice that will be available to people in this House. I still believe there's a majority in this House that want to deliver on the referendum result, but to do so with a deal. This is the bill that enables that to happen.
Chukaramuna.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the House is going to reject the Prime Minister's deal for a 4th time, and she's indicated that she will then set out a timetable for her departure. She's also just said that there's no mandate here to leave without a deal or indeed the country. So with regard to that timetable, if it is the case that a change in Prime Minister occurs near the end of October, leaving her successor no time to negotiate a further extension, will she herself request a further extension before the September recess to stop us leaving with no deal?
I'm afraid the honourable gentleman knows, I'm sure, my answer to that, which is if he really wants to ensure that we do not leave the European Union without a deal, then the best way is to agree a deal, and that is the bill.
Richard Graham.
is the saddest irony that those of my colleagues who most want to leave the European Union have so far frustrated us from doing so by voting with Labour and the Scottish Nationalists. And the Prime Minister is quite right to highlight the dangers of Parliament not supporting the withdrawal agreement bill the day before the European elections, which none of us on this side wanted to happen. Does she agree with me that the superficially seductive line from the Brexit Party, just leave on WTO terms, holds enormous dangers, above all for our farmers and for our manufacturers, and that this line would in fact cause the breakup of the United Kingdom?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he is absolutely right, particularly in the point that he makes about the dangers of a no-deal Brexit for the future of the United Kingdom, and that is a main concern and a key concern that I have in relation to that issue. But it is also, I think, surprising to see some of those who, at the time of the referendum, at the time of encouraging people to leave, were talking about leaving with a deal, about being like Norway, about accepting those sorts of restraints on the ability of the United Kingdom, now not being willing to accept what is a good deal for the UK, what enables us to ensure that we can leave with a deal that is good for the future of the UK. When people come to vote at the European elections tomorrow, they have an opportunity to vote for a party that not only believes in delivering Brexit, but can do it, and that is the Conservatives.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that this 10-point offer was framed after listening to the devolved administrations. Yet there's nothing in it to address the concerns expressed by Scotland's government, the cross-party majority in Scotland's Parliament, and the majority of Scottish members elected to this House. Now that her days of sneering at the democratically elected representatives of voters in Scotland are nearly at an end, does she concede that her successor will need a more intelligent approach to Scotland than she has felt able to adopt?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, we have consistently engaged with the Scottish Government, we have consistently engaged with the Welsh Government throughout these discussions and negotiations that we've had in relation to our future in the European Union. But can I also say to the Honourable Lady that what is important is that we all recognise the responsibility that we have to deliver on the vote that took place in 2016, Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, she says she doesn't have that responsibility. She is an elected member of this House, and she has a responsibility in the votes that she casts. She has said consistently that she doesn't want us to leave without a deal. That can only happen if we have a deal, or of course if we choose to stay in the European Union. She says that we have not listened to the Scottish Government. What the Scottish Nationalists have made clear at every stage is that they wish to revoke Article 50, they wish to go back on the referendum result of 2016, and they wish to keep the United Kingdom in the EU. The majority of the British public do not want that. They want a party in government, and they want parliamentarians in this House to deliver on what they asked us to do.
Bob Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly referred in her statement.
This is a most extraordinary situation. The Honourable Gentleman is seeking to ask a question, and he's been effectively heckled and prevented in a seemly way from doing so by the chuntering from a sedentary position in pursuit of Scottish tribal warfare by the Honourable Member. Calm yourself, man. The Prime Minister is perfectly capable of looking after herself. She was asked a question, she's given an answer. There can be differences of opinion and interpretation as to what is the responsibility of a Member of Parliament, and those issues have been aired. The Honourable Gentleman hasn't in any way benefited the mix by his disorderly chunter. Mr. Bob Neil.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly referred in her statement to the importance of leaving in a way which maintains the closest possible security, policing and judicial cooperation with the EU 27 that we have at the moment. The Justice Select Committee was given clear evidence by the head of the National Crime Agency that to do otherwise would severely impair our ability to fight organised crime and terrorism and keep our country safe. Does she agree that to fail to leave without a deal, to fail therefore to pass the only available means of leaving with a deal, will be to put the security of the country at risk, and that is not something that any member of this House responsibly could contemplate doing?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the issue of security. It is one that is rarely raised in these debates. The majority of questions tend to be about the economic relationship and the trade relationship. But the security relationship is fundamental to us being able to keep ourselves safe. That's why I'm pleased that we've negotiated in the political declaration the strongest possible security relationship with the EU for the future of any country that would be outside the European Union. But of course, if we were to leave with no deal, then those security relationships would not be open to us. Could we negotiate some for the future? That is, of course, possible, but it would require that further negotiation, and at the point of leaving, those security relationships would be stopped.
Caroline Flynn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the Right Honourable Member for Loughborough, who's left the chamber now, but the essence of what she was saying was everyone should take a breath and take stock of what is on the table, look at the published bill when it arrives on Friday, but also, I think, to all colleagues across the House, be mindful of the results of the European elections. The Prime Minister has said several times already that if the second reading of this bill does not succeed, there will not be another opportunity to leave with a withdrawal bill. The only course and direction will to be leave without any deal at all. And does she agree with me that anybody on whatever side of the House, if they claim to be against no deal, they should give this proposition without any commitments right now? They should give this proposition due consideration, think about how they will amend it, and as my right honourable friend for Pontefract said recently in a newspaper report, stop the shouting and start agreeing on what we can agree to move forward.
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, she is absolutely right. And that is that the point of the process of legislation that we have in this House is that once we are beyond second reading of the bill, it will be open to members across the House to put amendments down to the bill and to have those debates about the precise detail about how we are leaving. But anybody who wants to ensure that we leave with a deal and that we don't see a no-deal situation should support that second reading, enter into that debate, and that debate itself, of course, doesn't make commitments as towards the end of that process. I would hope that we would see that bill being passed and therefore the treaty ratified, but it will be open to have that debate while that bill is progressing through this House.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Speaker, so often the Right Honourable Lady from Don Valley has spoken with a great deal of common sense. Would my right honourable friend spell out what she has heard would be the consequences for our economy of leaving without a deal?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, there have obviously been a number of bits of analysis have been done in relation to the impact of leaving without a deal. I think there would be an immediate impact economically of leaving without a deal. Now, over time, of course, we could restore our fortunes, but I think it is much better to be in a position where we're leaving with a deal, which will unleash, I believe, significant business investment in this country and see that positive future for our economy. That's possible by leaving with a deal.
Pat McFadden.
Speaker, I've been listening to the Prime Minister respond to several questions about the consequences of no deal. Given what's likely to happen in the European Parliament elections tomorrow and in the Conservative Party leadership election to follow, on which she has fired the starting gun, does she regret legitimising and normalising a no-deal outcome in the minds of the public through the repetition of the mantra, no deal is better than a bad deal?
No, I don't. And I think no government could have gone into a situation where it said that it would accept whatever it was offered rather than be willing to see no deal. If it had been a bad deal, then I'd stand by what I said in relation to that matter. But I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that anybody sitting in this chamber who believes that we should not have a no-deal situation has to support a deal. That is the only way of making sure we leave, not with a no-deal. So, and that the vehicle for doing that, for determining the details of that leaving, is the Withdrawal Agreement Bill.
Yes. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Unlike 1831, the 1832 Reform Bill got through because some of those who opposed the government did not vote against it, and that led to progress. Can I say, as a national interest Conservative, I have by choice voted with the government on every single vote because I think it's right. And can I say that I hope that others who think that no deal is bad and trying to reverse the referendum is bad, that the majority both of this party, this House and the country would prefer to see the Withdrawal Agreement Bill get through, at least get through second reading, so we can make progress and have a chance of having a better future for our country.
Well, I'm afraid absolutely right. If we get through the second reading, we can then determine the details through the progress of the bill of the precise nature of our leaving. That will enable us to see progress for this country. And I believe, and just to pick up what my honourable friend said, I believe that it is absolutely in the national interest that we should leave the European Union, as the referendum vote said, but that we should do it with a good deal for this country, and that is what is on offer.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend asked the Prime Minister if she was intending to offer a free vote on the second referendum. I'd like to ask her the same question about the customs arrangements, which, as she knows, are extremely important for manufacturing industry. Would it be her plan to offer a free vote on those customs arrangements?
Say to the Honourable Lady that, as in the normal progress of these things, whipping decisions will be taken when we see what the proposals are that are on the table. But can I just also reiterate the point that I made in response to her right honourable friend, that it is not simply, when you look at the issues around manufacturing industry, the key issues that have been raised are, yes, the benefits of a customs union, those are in the political declaration already, but also ensuring that we're reducing the friction for trade at the border. That is not just about customs. It isn't just about customs, but the benefits of the customs union are in that political declaration already.
Oh, yes, a Lincolnshire grandee, Sir Edward Lee.
So grand, Mr. Speaker, but just a question. As the Prime Minister knows of my warm personal support for her, I voted for her deal not once, not twice, not 3 times. I have to say, as somebody who wishes her well and wishes this agreement well, I'm worried about the tactics of all this. I thought that we'd agree with the EU we were going to have binding indicative votes, which would have enabled people like me to express our opposition to a permanent customs union or a referendum and then vote for the withdrawal agreement. Now, when it's not necessary, because Parliament could do it anyway, I've been asked to vote for a bill which has on the face of it a nod towards a second referendum, which I believe would be disastrous to the Union and to the vast majority of people who voted Brexit. So can I just ask her to be very cautious, to listen to our party, to remember that the one vote we won was on the Brady Amendment, and if we can't get this through, given the incalculable disaster of losing this bill and not being able to bring it back again this session, that if necessary we'll think again and not bring it back.
My right honourable friend refers to the case of the indicative votes. Of course, what I'm proposing and what I've put forward is that during the passage of the bill, it will be possible to address these issues and come to those binding decisions on the issues, particularly the one that he references on the customs. Because the fact is, regardless of what indicative votes have been taken and what decisions have been put into the bill, had that been the way of we had progressed from those indicative votes on these issues, those matters would have been in scope within the bill, and it would still have been possible to for people to put other amendments down to those to that position, and for people to vote differently from the way in which they voted in the indicative votes. So that is why I think it is better to bring these matters to the point of decision, which will be the point within the bill where people are deciding not just to indicate a position, but actually what position comes into legislation.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that I sincerely want to help her get this deal through, a good deal through this House? But could she help me, my good common sense folk in Huddersfield, who are very clever people,
They are saying to me, after 3 years, now we know the full consequences of leaving the European Union. Why can't they have a chance to say what they think of the deal once it comes out of this House?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, I mean, obviously I've responded to similar points from his honourable and right honourable colleagues already this afternoon. But the point is that it will be possible within the debate on the withdrawal agreement bill, and even the right honourable gentleman wants to put a decision back to the people. Of course, it has to have a deal, as I think he indicated at the end of his question. To do that, that means getting the withdrawal agreement bill through. But it will be possible for the House to determine within that withdrawal agreement bill its position on this matter. The House has, as he will know, rejected a second referendum on a number of occasions already, but at the point at which it takes that decision within the bill, I think it will be making that decision in a different environment. But as I say, my position continues to be that we should deliver on the first referendum.
Choice between such distinguished colleagues. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend must have noticed the response in this House and the response overnight to her statement. In proposing this folderol, is she going through the motions, or does she really believe in it?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I don't think I would have been standing here at the dispatch box and be in receipt of some of the comments that I've been in receipt of from colleagues on my own side and across the House if I didn't believe in what I was doing. I'm doing it because I genuinely believe it is in the national interest for us to leave the European Union with a deal. The only way to get a deal through is to get a withdrawal agreement bill through this House. There are issues this House disagrees on, and I believe those issues should be put to the House, and the House will determine those issues. And it will be at that point that this House and all members of this House will have to come to some decisions. At the moment, it has been possible through indicative votes to give indications, but actually they haven't been decisions that will be put into legislation. When the time comes to look at this matter, these will be decisions about what should be going ahead in terms of the government's position on this issue and what should be in legislation, and people will not be able to duck the issues. It will be necessary to come to agreement.
Well, the honourable gentleman doesn't need to chunter from a sedentary position like that. He's a very illustrious representative of Huddersfield. But the honourable gentleman for North East Somerset has just used a noun which I hazard a guess has probably not been used on any other occasion in this Parliament, or if it has, only by the honourable gentleman.
Because he's got a dead councillor.
We're grateful to the honourable gentleman. Mr. Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I welcomed most about the statement yesterday was its change in tone, markedly different from the ones that had gone before. Can I also express gratitude to the Prime Minister for the amount of time she has personally spent with members from across the House, including myself, through which she has disagreed with but engaged with in recent weeks. It is clear, though, that the contents of the statement yesterday has widened divisions, not actually healed divisions going forward. Can I urge her, in the 2 weeks before this bill comes before Parliament and this House, to carry on that engagement with an open mind and enter into discussions at least about what can be changed on the face of the bill going into the committee stage, in which case we will all have something to talk about at least. Otherwise, it's not even worth putting it forward in the first place.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, obviously I'm happy to continue engaging across the House as I have been, and I thank him for his comments. Can I also suggest that, as his right honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, said earlier, I think it will be helpful to all members of the House to wait and see when the bill is published what the actual terms of the bill are. He is encouraging me to put a position on the face of the bill with which I do not agree, but I think it is right that what we do in the bill is enable this House to come to a decision on that particular issue.
Hampshire Knight, he represents a beautiful forest. Sir Desmond Swain.
Out by the end of July, she says. A Brexiteer of whatever flavour could grant the bill a second reading, saving their reservations for committee and make their final judgment at third reading, couldn't they? And what is a folder roll?
Well, I think there are different definitions. A showy and useless item, allegedly, or an unnecessary or inconsequential fuss or something. But that's only the honourable gentleman's view of the matter. I'm not expressing any view on that matter at all. I was just intrigued by the endless lexicon of the honourable gentleman. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, I think when our honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset, used that word, he was not intending it to be complimentary about the package that the government has been brought forward. Now, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, of course, for the bill to get through, for it to be ratified, for the treaty to be ratified, for us to be able to leave at the end of July. It's not only getting second reading through, but also ensuring that the bill is confirmed at third reading. But by getting through second reading, it's possible to have those debates within the structure as the progress of the bill, on the key issues that remain, on the key issues in which there remain disagreement between members of this House, such that it will be possible, I believe, to come to an agreement that can see us leave the European Union.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made it clear that she does not intend to put a commitment to a second referendum on the face of the bill at second reading. In the spirit of compromise, therefore, would she commit to giving her MPs a free vote at committee stage when we come to debate and vote on that measure?
As I've said, what we will put on what we are intending to put in the bill is the commitment to have a vote on whether to have a second referendum, and that the bill cannot be ratified until that vote has the bill cannot be completed and treaty ratified until that vote has taken place. So that gives I hope the confirmation to members of the House who are in favour of a second referendum that issue will be addressed properly within the passage of the bill. As I said earlier, whipping decisions are for a matter that will be taken closer to the time. I note the keenness with which some members on the opposition benches have to determine what the whipping arrangements for the government benches should be, but with no reference to the whipping arrangements for their own benches.
Thangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister asks us what did it say about democracy if we put this back to the public. Well, the Leader of the Opposition has already said from the dispatch box that if she likes her deal so much, this is roughly what he said, if she likes it so much, she shouldn't be afraid of putting it back to the people, and I agree with him. And she's putting it back to us time after time after time when we've already rejected it time after time after time. So why doesn't she trust the people? Why won't she go back to them and ask them what she thinks of her deal?
I do trust the people. That's why I believe it's our duty to put in place what the people asked us to do.
Mike Gapes.
It's clear that after weeks of negotiations between a pro-Brexit Prime Minister and a pro-Brexit Labour leadership, we have not been able to get an agreement on the terms of this process. And it's also clear that no Parliament can bind its successor, and no lame duck Prime Minister can bind her successor. So isn't it clear this Parliament is unable to resolve these matters, and we should go back to the people in a people's vote, or if we are unable to do that, we should revoke Article 50 and then have more time to find a way forward.
Praise the honourable gentleman. The point about revoking Article 50 is it is absolutely clear from the court judgment that you can't just revoke Article 50 in order to create more time to consider a deal and then re-trigger it and go back into a negotiating process. Once you revoke, and you stay in. I believe we should not be staying in, we should be leaving.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Excellent choice. In her statement, the Prime Minister said that to address concerns that a future government could roll back hard-won protections for employees, we will publish a new workers' rights bill. Mr. Speaker, it was this government that rolled back these protections in the anti-trade union bill. So, will she then, if she's serious about workers' rights, will she reinstate these lost protections in this new bill?
It is this government that has been enhancing workers' rights. It is this government that is putting in place the recommendations that have come from the Taylor Review. This is the first government to actually look seriously at the issue of our economy of today and the workers' rights for that are suitable for that economy. We've been enhancing workers' rights, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Alberto Costa.
Minister, I will be supporting this bill when it comes to the floor of this House for the simple reason that it is the only deal on the table that will protect under international law the rights of British citizens living in the EU as well as EU nationals living here. I'm grateful for the comments you made last September following Salzburg about protecting unilaterally certain rights of EU nationals. I regret that there was no mention of British citizens in your statement. What message do you have to British citizens living in the EU?
Well, the message I have is a consistent one, which is that we have certainly been working for their interests as well as the interests of EU citizens living here in the UK. That's why I'm pleased to see the reciprocity we were able to achieve in the withdrawal agreement, and that's an important part of the withdrawal agreement and therefore the withdrawal agreement bill. I've also been pleased, and we continue to work with the other 27 member states to ensure that they are able to confirm that were we to be in a no-deal situation, which, as I say, continues to be the legal default, were we to be in a no-deal situation, they would also be ensuring the rights of British citizens living in those 27 member states.
Bill Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, there's obviously your deal, but others in this House want to leave on WTO rules. Some want Norway Plus, some want Common Market 2.0, others Canada Plus, and the list goes on and on. Which option do you think the people voted for in 2016? And how does the government know its option, which now defines Brexit, is the option preferred by the British people without asking them?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he references the different opinions that there are in this House. That's precisely why I think it's important that we are able to crystallise those opinions to a position that can command a majority across this House. I think what people voted for when they voted in 2016, they voted to leave the EU, to end free movement, to ensure that our courts were supreme here, to ensure we weren't sending those vast annual sums to the European Union. They wanted us to be that independent nation. I believe an independent trade policy is part of that independence, and that is why I've put forward the position and supported the position I have in the past in relation to these matters around customs. But it will be for the House to determine the customs union objectives, and that's what we're talking about, the objectives for future negotiations.
Dr. Rupa Haq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the inevitable end nigh for the Prime Minister, and us still in the EU, in an extension to an extension, and several burning injustices still unextinguished everywhere, I wondered, could she tell us, under her premiership, factoring in the 2 new government ministries she created, the civil servants from all over redeployed to this exercise, and her costly and sometimes incompetent no-deal planning experiments. Now she's telling us that's such a bad thing. How much has Brexit cost the public purse?
The Honourable Lady knows full well that the figures that the Treasury have made available for 2 departments to prepare for Brexit, in whatever form that takes, have indeed been made public. But she talks about alludes to other work that this government has undertaken. I'm very pleased that this government introduced, for example, the race disparity audit, that we are taking action to ensure that those in certain communities who find it harder to get into the workplace are given the support that they need in order to be able to do this, that we have been able to introducing changes to domestic abuse legislation. There are many areas where this government is acting to deal with exactly the injustices that I have referred to previously.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows that her promises are only valid for as long as she's Prime Minister, which is probably be measured now in hours rather than days, because her successor can tear them up. So even if the House was to vote for what's come to be known as May's Brexit mayhem, we could land up with Boris's Brexit Buruk. Is it any surprise that the people of Scotland are not prepared to accept that, and the people of Scotland tomorrow will once again declare our determination that our nation will remain in the European Union, and if the Prime Minister's nation insists on leaving, they better reconcile themselves to the fact that they're leaving without us?
For those people of Scotland who want to ensure that we leave the European Union with a good deal for the whole United Kingdom, including Scotland, there is only one party to vote for, and that is the Conservatives. And for the people of Scotland who want to ensure that Scotland remains in the most important union for it, economically and in other ways, the United Kingdom, is to vote Conservative.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister states that those of us seeking a public vote should support her withdrawal agreement and during the second reading to make our own case to Parliament. But we have already and repeatedly made our case in this chamber for a public confirmatory vote. If the Prime Minister wishes to be bold with a new offer, she must allow the public a voice on her deal, which is democratic. Does she agree?
Say to the Honourable Lady, I think I answered that question earlier and I refer her to the answer that I gave.
Tom Brake.
Speaker, at the latest count, 8 ministers or members of Parliament who sit beside or around the Prime Minister are jostling for her job. Most, if not all of them, appear to be enthusiastic endorsers of a kamikaze no deal. Given what she knows about no deal, can she understand why any of those candidates would want to advocate that?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he can leave the issue of the determination of the leadership of the Conservative Party to the Conservative Party. What this House has to decide is whether it wants to leave the European Union with a deal or without a deal. Withdrawal Agreement Bill is the vehicle that enables us to ensure that we leave with a deal.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has been very clear that she believes that the deal she has is what the public want, but she's also very clear that she's not supporting a second referendum or confirmatory vote. Does she see the inconsistencies in those arguments? And frankly, what's she scared of?
No suggestion. Look, it's very simple. The House, the issue of a second referendum will be one that, as I say, if we get through second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, it will be possible for people who wish to see that second referendum to put that case to the House and the House to come to a decision on that matter. I have made changes to the offer that I have put forward. I've set those out today in the statement to the House that I have given. Those have reflected the discussions that we've been having across this House and addressed concerns that have been raised by members of this House.
David Linden.
Mr Speaker, throughout the Prime Minister's statement she talks a lot about compromise, and I agree, I think that there is an element of compromise that's required. But since the referendum result in 2016, the Scottish Government has sought to compromise. So can she tell me, just name one single part of the document, Scotland's Place in Europe, that she agreed to compromise on?
Say to the honourable gentleman, yes, indeed, we have had discussions with both the Scottish and Welsh governments about their concern, particularly about trade across the European Union, and the proposals that we have put forward have reflected those concerns, together with the discussions that we've had with business across the whole of the United Kingdom. The position, as I understand it, of the Scottish Nationalists now is that they want to revoke Article 50. That is not the position. That is not a compromise. That is not a compromise. That is a position that goes back on the result of the referendum.
Geraint Davis.
Mr Speaker, MPs from around the House have suggested that her deal isn't sustainable because she's announced her resignation and it isn't future-proofed. But would she agree with me that it's not just her deal, but any deal cannot be future-proofed unless it's in
This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.